Hi everyone, hope you're well. Thank you so much for logging on to my page to learn more about the psychology professions and all about what it takes to become a psychologist. When I was looking to train, this was a bit of a minefield. There were a lot of things that I really hoped were plainly described, plainly available, so that I could know which way to go, what was for me and what wasn't. So I've created this video just to talk through that. Just to talk through all the different things to consider, to share a bit of my journey, to share about the landscape so that you have more of a view of what you're looking at and what you're going into and whether or not this will be a good fit for you. So without further ado, we will begin. Grab a coffee, grab a tea, grab a pen and a notepad, and let's have a conversation. So just to share a little bit about me. So to begin with, my name is Nikita. I'm very passionate about all things mental health and well-being. I'm a counselling psychologist, so this is the type of psychologist, the type of training that I've undergone, and we'll speak more about that as we go along. I'm a founder of my own private practice called Therapyish. We do lots of things, mainly one-to-one therapy, but also courses, resources. I've had the opportunity to create a therapy journal coming from different things that I've noticed in my practice, different needs of my clients, homeworks that I was giving, and just putting that all together in one place to give to the client and to empower the client. I also do talks frequently, educating different groups of people, particularly within faith groups and within the Black and ethnic minority community. And I also have a podcast, so please do check that out when you have a moment. Okay. In my training as a counselling psychologist, I had to do a thesis. My thesis topic was one of my areas of interest. My question was, how are spiritual experiences understood as mental health problems in mental health services in the UK? So yeah, that's just a fun fact. But, well, I'm sure I could have come up with another fun fact. But yeah, that was coming from my understanding that there was a gap in the market as it pertains to how we understand and see spiritual experiences in the world of mental health. So just wanted to look into that, and that was a fun piece of work and possibly more to come. Okay, and I've had experience working in a range of settings, so in the NHS, in charities, in prisons, which I will share more about later, as well as in private practice, and helping people with a range of different difficulties. So currently I predominantly work with adults, as well as couples. I have worked with young people in the past. I have worked in specialisms, like I said, prisons, psychosis. We'll talk more about that. But yeah, this is me, basically. Yeah. Okay, so to begin, let's think about a psychologist and what a psychologist is. I should have gone back to speak about what psychology is. Psychology is the study of human behaviour. There are different types of psychologists that work in different fields in the UK. To let you know that the term psychologist is actually not a regulated title. Please don't do this. But in the UK, legally, you can call yourself a psychologist without a qualification. And so, yeah, please don't do this. It's largely frowned upon. But the specific types of psychologists are all regulated. They're regulated titles by the Healthcare Professions Council. This means that someone who calls themselves clinical psychologist, counselling psychologist, forensic psychologist, health psychologist, etc., will have done the appropriate level of qualification, usually a doctorate, and will have met the criteria to be accredited for that, and then we'll have registered with the Healthcare Professions Council, will be subject to regulation by them, pay a membership, be subject to auditing by them, and if they do anything wrong, like I said, regulated by them. So these are all protected titles within the UK, right? Okay, so the different types of psychologists. We have a clinical psychologist. A clinical psychologist tends to be NHS based. The doctorate degree is funded by the government, the NHS. which would mean that it's really highly competitive to get into. And I think the average number of attempts before someone gets in is 5. So yeah, highly competitive. Once you get in, your doctorate is paid for, and I believe you receive a level of pay as well, just to look after yourself. So yeah, it's requires having had experience as an assistant psychologist, and usually within NHS services as well as demonstrating competency to navigate the course, as you do in most of these cases. And the work would look different in NHS settings, but depending on the different settings, but the work is mainly CBT based, therapy and then service management, the higher up you go into being a qualified clinical psychologist. Okay, a counselling psychologist. So there are some similarities to clinical psychologist, in that a counselling psychologist can work within the NHS, but the training is not just limited to the NHS. The training and the encouragement is that you can work in a plethora of settings, including also the private sector, private practice. I feel there's more training towards private practice and more openness towards it in counselling psychology doctorates than in clinical psychology. You can also work in the charity sector. The counselling psychology degree is self-funded, so it's quite hefty. Recently, actually looking at the university I went to, which did not cost that in my time, but I think the fees are currently 12,000 plus per year for home students. So it is absolutely wild, and it's definitely worth counting the cost. There are different things in place that can support, including student finance, doctoral degree loans and stuff like that, but they may not cover the full cost, and there is a lot of cost, a lot of kind of unmentioned costs, including private therapy, obviously your books, private supervision if needed, and on the course you're encouraged not to work. So it's definitely worth thinking about and considering and weighing up everything before embarking on that. The main work with counselling psychologists is providing therapy, consultancy, research and service management as well. So yeah, there's a whole range, I think broader range of possibilities and things you can do. And it's not that it's limited as according to the different psychologists, but more so that within counselling psychology, the course really does show a breadth and open up to a breadth of different possibilities, more so than clinical, where most of the work and the framework is NHS based. Okay, then you have forensic psychologists, and forensic psychologists are based in forensic prison and forensic mental health settings. Forensic psychologists can also offer independent assessments, fitness to plea, and stuff like that, and therefore can hold independence in that way. But their expertise is really in the forensic domain. There are different routes to becoming a forensic psychologist. You can go the master's way, where you can be awarded, a qualification upon completion, and based on the amount of experience that you've obtained within that time as well. And it is also a doctorate. And the main work, again, is around conducting research and creating and delivering interventions within forensic settings, as well as consultancy, and then, like I said, the court reports and stuff like that. So it looks slightly different. I would say that forensic psychologists have less of an emphasis on therapy, particularly within training, and more on interventions, which are slightly different. You have occupational psychologists as well. They are qualified to master's degree, and they go into organisations and offer tailored work there, and they can also be very heavily involved in marketing and thinking about the psychology of the consumer and stuff like that. So again, very, very different. You do have other types of psychologists. You have health psychologists, you have educational psychologists, mainly around special educational needs, and kind of having an area of expertise in that, and you will find them in education, in schools, and in that sector. Sports and exercise psychologists. So yeah, lots of different psychologists. Not all of them are involved in therapy, as you will see and as you will have heard. And so it's really about your specific areas of interest, qualification, and the level to which you desire to be qualified to, your flexibility, your financial situation. Lots of different factors come into play when you are considering what type of psychologist you might want to be. There are other psychology-related professions that are not psychologists, but would still work in the field and would still work in tandem, often with psychologists or within the same team, or in similar roles. So you have an assistant psychologist. So they would typically work under a qualified psychologist, providing psychoeducational interventions, and doing admin and just supporting the team with the delivery of interventions. Many of our services today, particularly in the NHS, absolutely need the work of assistant psychologists to function, and we definitely do appreciate assistant psychologists. It is a training role. It is not just an admin role. It's a training role that would allow you the opportunity to get experience with working with clients, to understand how the service operates, to have exposure to and supervision by a qualified psychologist. And so assistant psychologist roles are often the starting point for people who wish to embark on a psychology profession. Okay, you have the psychological wellbeing practitioner. This is a role that is based in type of services called IAPT, which stands for Improving Access to Psychological Therapy. A lot of services are moving away from calling it that, but I will call it that just for the sake of ease. And so these are, again, delivering psychoeducation one-to-one and in groups. It's quite similar to the assistant psychologist role, but I think there is a bit more training, and yeah, working within that particular service or type of service. So in primary care, and that is with basically adults who are working maybe or not doing too badly, so not with severe and enduring mental health, adults who are doing well but struggling with what we refer to as common mental health problems, so anxiety, depression, OCD, panic, sleep issues and that sort of thing. And so the work of a psychological wellbeing practitioner, or PWP, would be to walk them through guided psychoeducation towards getting better. Okay, we have a high intensity practitioner or CBT therapist. They tend to work in the same kind of service with PWPs or psychological wellbeing practitioners, offering kind of more assessment and more tailored interventions for people with the same kind of difficulties. You have a counsellor. So counselling is one of those terms that is thrown around, used a lot, and a lot of people don't really know what it is, or it. I'm going to use the term talking therapy, but again, that's another term that is subject to interpretation. But counselling is basically a form of talking therapy, and there are lots of different modalities of counselling, but in essence, when we think of counselling, a lot of people tend to think of what we refer to as person-centred counselling, which is basically just talking through difficulties, reflecting, and just guiding the person through difficulties. So counsellors are trained usually at diploma level. I think it's up to level 4. They do regular CPD, and they work through a range of difficulties with people, whether that is grief, whether that is mental health difficulties, couples work, family work, range of different things. But I think the main thing with counsellors is maybe the level of qualification and the robustness of the clients that they work with. So counsellors tend to work on one issue as opposed to a range of difficulties. You have a psychotherapist. Psychotherapists are trained to master's level, and they are trained to navigate through lots of different types of difficulties, and kind of stringent training to be able to do that. Okay, you have psychoanalysts, and these are people who are trained within an analytical framework. So you think of, Freud, that is if you did any kind of psychology in secondary school or uni, you'll be familiar with that. And it's a very particular worldview. It isn't just a therapy modality, it also does very much influence the worldview of both the practitioner and the client. So it's something to think about. And then you have coaching. And coaching is on the more solution focused, action focused end of the spectrum, and so it is less, or we tend to think of coaching as less to do with the talking therapy element, and more to do with the action or change. Coaching is not necessarily a regulated profession either. Again, that's not, you can be under, there are different bodies that you can be under to be regulated, but one does not have to have a qualification to call themselves a coach. However, it really is more about the ethos, what you believe, which we'll talk more about towards the end, than it is about, whatever. Okay. So let's think a little bit about the landscape of professionals. So, and this is kind of particular to the NHS, but this is just to kind of illustrate where you would find the different, we've spoken about lots of different types of therapists, if you will, loosely speaking. The term therapist is also not regulated and is very generic. So yeah, there's lots of different types, and this is just to give you an idea of what this means or where you'll find them, because I know it is a minefield and it is difficult to decide which one you want to be from the outside looking in. So when someone is struggling with their mental health, they're feeling low, they're feeling anxious, they're feeling depressed, whatever it is, their first port of call and the place where health professions would expect that the individual goes first is to their GP. So your GP, this is something I had to learn along the career journey. I don't think this is common knowledge. It's not exactly taught. But your GP is the person that is responsible for all things pertaining to your physical health and your mental health. And so even when you sign up, even if you should decide to sign up for private therapy, your private therapist will often collect the details of your GP in case they are going to inform them or write them a letter, or in case there's something that happens where they're concerned about harm to yourself or another person, they would need to know your GP details in order to be able to get in touch with them. So if we think of the GP as the hub for health in general, for yourself, everything that pertains to your mental health care, that is where you're expected to go when you have any kind of difficulty. And so the GPs would often be thinking in the first instance towards both medication and therapy. So let's say you're feeling anxious, you're feeling depressed, you're suffering with any kind of common mental health issue. Sometimes the GP can prescribe medication short term to support you and help with that, and would also look towards therapy for you. Now, in terms of therapy, there's a range of different things that they can offer. Sometimes GP surgeries have access to counselling and have a counselling budget with them. This is something that is rolled out every financial year, so in April, runs out quite quickly. And so, yes, it's a limited resource, but is sometimes there. So it's worth finding out in your particular GP if that's something that interests you. Otherwise, they might refer to an IAPT service that I refer to, or talking therapies, it's often called these days. And that is your low-level interventions where you work with primary care, in essence, where you work with a psychological wellbeing practitioner or a CBT therapist, or attend a group, or do guided self-help or online psychoeducation with a platform called Silvercloud. That's where you would be going in the first instance, right? Now, with both those cases, so GP prescribing maybe some short-term antidepressants or something like that, and referring you to talking therapies, if the GP or talking therapies or anyone at any point feels that you have a need that exceeds, what they're offering, maybe you need diagnoses, or you need more appropriate medication that's maybe regulated at a higher level, they might send you to a service where you might have contact with a psychiatrist. So currently in the UK, there are lots of services called mental health hubs, which act as a bridge between what we think of as primary mental health and secondary mental health. And secondary mental health is where people are seen who have long and enduring mental illnesses. And so that's where you might have contact with a psychiatrist who might offer diagnoses or prescribe medication or review your medication. And within these kind of services, even within IAPT services or talking therapies, you would find in management levels, you would find clinical counselling, sometimes forensic psychologists. And they are basically trained to deal with complex presentations, to review, to screen, to have, in essence, the work as a psychologist is to have a breadth of knowledge and oversight, and to be able to consult and advise. And also, psychologists do offer private work and private consultation. But within the NHS, it's really about being able to consult, being able to manage the service, managing the assistant psychologists, and dealing with complex presentations, complex clients. So sometimes the psychologists would have a small caseload themselves where they see some of the most complex clients. So psychologists do not diagnose and cannot prescribe medication. Psychiatrists do. That's the main difference. In essence, a psychiatrist is a medical doctor who deals with medication and diagnoses in order to determine the appropriate medication or treatment plan. And psychologists are not medical doctors. They are doctors of philosophy. So they would have done a doctorate, not a medical degree. And they will be more concerned with formulating, understanding the client, understanding all the different things that affect the client and that make them who they are and that bring them to where they're at this moment in time, as well as managing the team and other dynamics like that. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, and we spoke a little bit about this, so there isn't too much need for me to go into much detail other than to say that this is kind of the mental health provision that we're looking at in the NHS at the moment. So you have your GP, you have your IAPT service, which is also known as talking therapies. You have your secondary care services, which is for people with long and enduring mental illness, whether that is psychosis, whether that is long-term trauma, whatever that is, these services are often resourced with social workers, psychologists, group services, etc. And then you have inpatient mental health services, and these are for people who are acutely unwell. So people who, and I guess there's a whole other, video to speak about mental illness, what it is, how we see it, and stuff like that. But in essence, just because someone has long and enduring mental illness doesn't mean that they are going to be in hospital for the rest of their lives. It's more so dealt with in this country situationally. So if at the moment they are having a crisis, someone is having a crisis that requires hospitalization, they will be in for a period of time, and then that will be reviewed and in hospital for a period of time. And these are the inpatient services that I have referred to. So you can also find psychologists and psychology services in those settings where there's access to groups, there might be therapy, that sort of work. Other services that we have in this country are emergency services. So we have a crisis service that is available in every locality, and this is for people who are in what we would refer to as crisis. Again, a whole other training, but in essence is, at danger, at risk of harming themselves or even another person, self-harm, suicidal ideation with plan and intent, the crisis service would be the one to go to. You also have the police. The police are actually involved in our mental health system, funny enough. And that is if someone is mentally unwell, maybe might require sectioning, that is a police job. And then we have A&E. A&E is another place for emergencies such as crises, that you can recommend that people go to if they're not feeling 100%. So yeah, and through the, if they're not feeling very well and they need urgent attending to, and in A&E they'll be connected to a service that we call the psychiatric liaison service, which operates in most hospitals, which will then put them in touch with their local mental health services if needed. Okay, so it's worth also thinking about the alternative provision. This is part of the landscape that we have in the United Kingdom. There are lots and lots and lots of different services that are out there and available. So we have the charity sector. The charity sector is made up of a range of loads of different services that offer individual, telephone, online support, groups, therapy, and honestly, no service, whether that is NHS, whether that is private, none of us would be who we are today without the charity sector and the amazing work that they do to help us and to uphold us. Because mental health services, I will tell you now, are absolutely inundated. So it's amazing the range of different things that are offered. Charity sector services also offer low cost options to therapy. So therapy might not necessarily be free, but would definitely be at a lower cost than they would be privately, might be means tested, and such like that. There may be waiting lists, but it definitely is available. And different charity sector organisations have specialisms in different areas. So on there we have the example of Cruise. They are specialists in bereavement care. We have Relate. They are specialists in relationships. All these different organisations that are out there, right? We also have private options. And so when we say private, there's different things that we might mean. What we might mean is individual therapists like myself who have private practices, see clients privately, and those would often be discoverable. You can find them via the BACP website, via the counselling directory, which is one of my go-tos, and via the HCPC directory as well, the Healthcare Professions Council. So these will be people that are operating their private practice and are discoverable via these databases, as well as in other platforms, social media and other things. Word of mouth, that's one of the biggest ones. And then you have other examples of where you might find private therapy, which is through insurance, such as Bupa, AXA, many of the other ones as well, who you might be able to get in touch with. The Priory is another one, but the Priory is slightly different. But these are examples of private providers of mental health care in the UK. Okay, so let's have a look at my training journey. I think this is important because, again, it's not something I really had access to for other people. When I was thinking to train, I had a lot of questions along the way. And so I think that transparency is helpful because not that our journeys will be the same, but that it can be helpful to see what it's like for someone else. So, initial interest in counselling psychology. So I was about 17. I had known that I was interested in counselling professions, so I was interested in helping people, particularly in being the person that would be there for people who were going through difficulties that they did not feel that they could discuss with other people. And so I had known that was in me, that passion was there. But now it was, okay, well, I'm in sixth form, I'm studying psychology, but how does one actually action what I would like to and what is the best way? So I did a bit of research. And I went on the Prospects website, and very helpfully, they have a lot of, I would actually recommend you go on there because it will give you a live view of what each profession is like. But in essence, I went on the Prospects website and I had a look at what a counsellor is. What is a counsellor? What do they do? What kind of roles do they take up? And in all honesty, what do they earn? That's important. Money is important. We need to survive and thrive. And then I also looked at a counselling psychologist and what that is, because that came up on the suggestions actually. I looked at the difference between the two. So at the time, it seemed that the counselling psychologists were qualified to a higher level than the counsellors and therefore could attain higher levels of higher positions, higher pay, but also higher positions in terms of more managerial positions and stuff like that. Whereas at the time, counsellors were capped at a certain level, band 6, in the NHS, if you're familiar with that. And so I just looked at the two, and having not really started out on my career journey, I felt that I didn't want to cap myself or limit myself. I didn't want to get somewhere and then be bored, or get somewhere and then not be able to get any further. So I decided to go towards the counselling psychology route. These were my thoughts. So the other thing that I did was I looked into the initial entry requirements for the doctorate. Actually, I made a spreadsheet which had all the different universities in London, because that was what was most accessible to me at the time, that do counselling psychology in and around London, and what their entry requirements were. And I plotted them and their fees and everything. Plotted them so I could have a live comparison, so I could look at the commonalities and so that I could see what I needed to attain to in order to become a counselling psychologist. So I've heard a few people say that they actually wanted to be clinical psychologists, that didn't work out, and then they became counselling psychologists. That wasn't the case for me. I always wanted to be a counselling psychologist, went straight for it, and yeah, that was always in my plan. So I started off with a first degree in psychology with a placement year, because one of the entry requirements was to have a year's worth of experience in the field, working in the field. So I kind of chose a degree with a placement. My idea was by the time I would finish my first degree, I would have everything that I needed. So I did that, and that was from 2013 to 2017. In the middle of my first degree, I did a counselling skills course. That was also one of the requirements of the doctorate, to have a counselling skills qualification. That is usually offered in college and is like a 10-week course, like Friday evenings or something. But I actually did it at City University, and they had condensed that course into 5 days. So I went on that course and did that. Although I did a first degree in psychology, I found none of it really be very relevant to being a counselling psychologist, except maybe my final year module. And so that course, that counselling skills course, was really what made me know that, yeah, this is the stuff I'm looking for. This is the stuff I've been wanting to talk about. This is the stuff I want to experience. It really did confirm my passions to go down this path. So then I did an assistant psychologist role as well. So bear in mind, I had the doctorate in mind this whole time, and I was looking for opportunities to get my experience up. And so I did a voluntary role as an assistant psychologist in a counselling charity for a few months. Okay, and then I graduated. I graduated with a 2-1. So this is another thing, is that a 2-1 is the minimum requirement for going on to further education as a psychologist in the UK. If you do not or have not obtained a 2-1, not to worry. I think there are other options, including doing a, what is it called? A conversion course, psychology conversion course, or other options. It might be worth speaking to the universities that you are thinking of applying to, if that's the case, to find out more about that and to find out about the different possibilities. Okay, so graduated with a 2-1, and actually I applied straight out of uni. I applied to the doctorates. I had three main universities that I was looking at, which were Surrey, City and East London. I had been to the open days. I've been going to different open days along the course of the last 2 years of my first degree, just to get a feel for the universities, ask any questions and make sure that I was preparing myself the best that I could. I was declined at Surrey and East London, but I was offered an interview at City University, so I went. That was an interesting process. However, I was declined. That was okay, because as I came to realise, that very, very much prepared me for the second application attempt in which I got in, and I'll share a bit about that. So when I was declined, I was looking at what do I do? It's like a year before I can apply again and go again. So what do I do? How do I prepare myself? How do I equip myself? How do I make sure I've got more experience? And so I set about applying for a job, my first graduate job, and I found a job with Mind, the mental health charity, one of our local minds, working as a wellbeing access worker. So this role wasn't really a clinical role. It was more so like promoting the service. So it was in tandem with an IAP service, actually. So Mind and an IAP service. And my job was to go to different functions, connect with different organisations and promote both services. And so I did that. I was all over. And actually that role was really, really helpful because it taught me so much about the services, the landscape of services, the landscape that I've given you today. I learnt that from doing that role. I learnt that from speaking to lots of different people, learning about different services, what they offer, going to fairs. I would keep our Mind banners in the boot of my car and a huge stack of leaflets and pens and stuff, and just going around different places and making contacts and networking. And it taught me so much. Because my supervisor at the time was amazing, we were able to have a conversation about what my goals and dreams were. And I had told her that I really wanted to get onto the Counselling Psychology doctorate. So we negotiated within my role to allow for me to have some one-to-one experience of one-to-one work, because that was quite important. And I noticed it was one of the questions that I was asked in an interview. And so we negotiated that, and I was able to, they allowed me to do initial assessments into the service. And so that helped me a lot, because that meant that in the next time when I was applying for the doctorate and being interviewed, I was able to say, okay, well, this is the one-to-one experience that I have. In between that time as well, so whilst I was declined for the doctorate at City, they did offer me a course, quite interestingly. They declined me for the doctorate and they offered and suggested that I do the postgraduate certificate in counselling psychology. So at City, the postgraduate certificate is a year-long course, and it basically gives you a good overview of counselling psychology, and can prepare you for the doctorate if you're going to go ahead to that, but it can also let you know if it's not for you. It was an amazing year. I met a lot of lovely people on the course, some of whom have gone on to be qualified counselling psychologists, and some of whom maybe realised that it wasn't for them. And so, yeah, it was a great course, great year. It was self-paid as well, so that wasn't easy, working, and I wasn't working for very much because I was working in a charity, and I was very much in a very entry-level role. And so I remember even thinking at that time, I guess money is a whole conversation to have, but I remember looking at my peers who'd done other degrees in business and different sciences and stuff like that, law, who had started off with really good pay or much better pay than I was on. And I remember just thinking, and actually I remember looking at my colleagues who had just gone for jobs because of money, which is fair enough. Like, we need to survive. Do you know what I mean? And that time when you finish university, you can feel like a bit of a burden to the world. But I do remember looking at them and looking at myself and just telling myself, you've done this for your career. It wasn't easy at all. It was incredibly tough. It was incredibly stressful. I was always short, trying to manage, trying to navigate and trying to find joy. I managed to get through, thank God. So did the postgraduate certificate, and then it came to time to apply again, and I reapplied, and I was accepted, which I'm so grateful for. Thankfully, the interview process in the first year that I applied, 2017 and 2018, were quite similar. In fact, there was a written exam in both, and the question was the same. And so, having done it before, I was equipped to do it again, and this time I thought about it, I'd had time, and I smashed it. So really grateful for that. Okay, so because I was embarking on the doctorate, I then took up another job at Mind, which gave me more one-to-one experience, but also paid a little bit more just to help me along, which was a peer support role, and I did that for my first year of the doctorate. Eventually, it became too much, and I had to leave the role for that and other reasons. But so that was a good role, actually, just having more one-to-one experience whilst training on the doctorate and doing placement. And so yes, I embarked on the doctorate from 2018 to 2021, so that was 3 years. Along the doctorate, I registered for BACP membership, which I could do after the first year, just to allow me the freedom to practice privately, actually. And I launched my private practice. Completed the doctorate, but there was a gap between completing the taught course, the taught part of the doctorate, and all the modules and all the requirements, and completing my thesis, which I finally completed in 2025. So, got there in the end. And that was a whole journey, which we will speak about. Okay, so I just want to do a bit of a dive into my placement experiences. And this is just to give you a bit of a look in to what it was like, what my thoughts were, what my experiences were, any lessons learned, and just to hand them over to you so that you don't have to go through the same. Okay, so in my first year, I was desperate to find a placement, and this was a weird one because the course started in September and placement started pretty much straight away. So the university kind of handed over the responsibility of finding placements to you, the student, and so I was keen to find one, keen not to waste time, because along the doctorate you had to get a certain number of hours in each year. So I actually started looking for my placement before I started the course, and I was able to find one in a drug and alcohol recovery service as their psychology placement student. It was good. It was a good placement. It was good in the sense that it gave me the opportunity to practice my person-centered therapy, as well as to practice a bit of CBT as well. It was a good placement, and I'm grateful that they gave me the opportunity. The only thing that I would say is that I didn't have a psychologist in the service, a registered psychologist in the service to be my supervisor. So I had to obtain that privately and pay for it privately. That was really tricky. We also had quite a few changes within the service. The service changed providers, and it was just kind of clunky. I remember there being about a month period where many people left the service in terms of staff. I was left without a supervisor, and it was very tricky. And so what I have learned from that experience, or what I did learn from that experience, was that even though it would be lovely to work in whatever service, it was important to think about the requirements for my course, what I needed in order to be able to be well supported, to thrive, and to actually pass the placement, and to ensure that the next service I was to go into would have that. And so because of that experience, I went towards IAPT for my second year. IAPT, talking therapies, synonymous. Okay, I went towards an IAPT service, and that was because charity sectors services can be very underfunded. The NHS feels quite different, and so it was nice to finally be, not fighting for room space as much, to have my own office, to feel more professional, to be supported by a team, and just the other things that I hadn't had the opportunity to experience in my first year, and maybe, taken the need for granted. So that was nice. However, and also not to have to pay for supervision. The IAP service provided a supervisor, CBT therapist supervisor, and then a psychologist supervisor to make sure that the criteria was met. However, it was an awful experience, awfully awful, because I had not been trained as a PWP or as a CBT therapist. It was like ships passing, in the sense that it became clear that my supervisors were not abreast to how I had been trained, what I had been trained in, and were regulating me according to their own criteria, and it was just a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding. That year taught me a lot how to speak up for myself, and that was really difficult, a difficult time. One of my supervisors didn't seem to like me. That wasn't great. And yeah, it was really tough, and it was also amidst COVID, so ended up having to do some work from home. It was a difficult time, but yeah, it helped me to get my hours. I also had an interest in working in prisons, so I took this opportunity to obtain a placement in prison service, and I had the opportunity of working in a prison, in a young offenders institute, as a trainee counselling psychologist. So that was really cool, just going into prisons, seeing this thing that I had watched lots of documentaries about, read about, was interested in, and finally being able to be there myself, have clients of my own. And I also got to work with a supervisor, psychologist, counselling psychologist, who was a black lady, and that was really lovely, just being able to work with her. We still have a relationship till date. Really lovely to see someone who had gone before me functioning in an area that I definitely had interest in. Also to mention that I made sure that my therapist, because you do have to get private therapy along the journey of the doctorate, I made sure that my private therapist was also a black therapist, a black psychologist who had actually trained at my university. So it always felt like I was looking at my older sister or someone who had done what I was going to do. And I loved having these two people, the supervisor and my therapist, to be in front of my eyes, if you will, to show me that what needed to be done was doable, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, that was really great. COVID happened, a job opportunity arose through my university to work in a hospital as in sort of a PWP-ish role of delivering psychoeducational group interventions to staff during COVID in a hospital setting. So I took it up. As you know, I'd stopped working at Mind. It's not easy being out of work. Finances were definitely needed. And it was a wonderful opportunity that I had. I was working with intensive care, offering support to staff in intensive care during the COVID pandemic, April 2020 to August 2020. So that was really lovely. Unique experience. But yeah, I did take up that opportunity. And in my final year, I worked in a psychosis service. So again, just keeping in the NHS for just funding and resourcing purposes. I had the opportunity to work in a secondary mental health service working with clients with psychosis. And here I had the opportunity to do long-term therapy, up to 30 sessions with some clients, and to experience what that was like, really. I had a really tricky experience with my supervisor, some racialized experiences. She threatened to fail me. She told me I would amount to nothing. It was a tough time. Racist clients as well, who would say racist things to me, and my supervisor kind of unfortunately understood that as me having problems with my racial identity, as opposed to an opportunity to challenge the client. This experience really did rattle me. It really did affect my self-esteem and my confidence, even into work post-qualification, and took me a number of years to undo, and to realise that I am a competent practitioner. I'm very competent, and equally to realise I have the right to stand up and have zero tolerance towards racialised behaviour towards me, especially when I am in a position to try and offer help. So, life after the doctorate. It's been an interesting one. Before I had even finished in final year, I started looking for a job. Why? Because your girl needs money. The doctorate is such an expensive course. On top of having done my first degree, the student loans were really racking up. Having not worked consistently for that most of the doctorate, it wasn't easy financially. And outside of the actual course, there was so much to pay for. Private therapy, your books, transport into uni, even. Anything that was needed was a cost. And that aside, you sort of have this feeling where you've been studying again after doing your first degree, and your friends have been working. You feel indebted to the world, or behind sometimes. And so I just wanted to get into employment, get a job, get my money up, and start forging my career path, because it wasn't easy. I applied for jobs, and very thankfully got a job almost straight away, which was really amazing. And I am still with that organisation. That was really lovely that I was given the opportunity. And they're great. They are the best NHS trust that I've worked in, because different trusts are different, have different cultures, different perks, and different ethoses. And they treat their staff differently. So yeah, I love this one. They're amazing, they're great, and they have been very kind to me. I wanted to have experience working in an established system. So whilst private practice was my long-term goal, and I will discuss that a bit further, I knew that I wanted to work in the NHS for a bit post-qualification, to experience an established system, how it worked, how it operated, and how I needed to operate in that system, and to be able to forge my career path as well, get my experiences up. And so that was important. And I did that. Private practice was also another strand to life after doctorate. So continuing on with the private practice I had launched, it was an arm through which I could think about my dreams and my visions for the future. And so being able to be fully self-employed, for example, being able to have different streams of income. It also was an area within which I was able to express my creativity. So one of the things I did was create a therapy journal, which was just a combination, I think I mentioned this earlier, a combination of things I had been experiencing in my sessions with clients. And I thought, why don't I put this together and create a journal that my clients can take and can use for their homework tasks and for their journaling. And so with Therapyish, my private practice, I would have an idea and I could execute it. I didn't have to jump through loopholes. I didn't have to seek funding. I didn't have to speak to this person, and this person, because it was my baby and my vision. And equally, my podcast, that was another idea that I had, and I had the freedom to be creative about it and just to do. So that was lovely, and I do enjoy that, and I do enjoy that in private practice. I have also been able to develop my niche. So very interestingly, I put myself out there, and I have noticed the kinds of people that gravitate towards me and the kinds of difficulties I end up encountering and supporting people through. It's helped me to develop, okay, this is who I see. So when I first launched Therapyish, it was just kind of this is me and this is what I'm doing. And that is a whole other topic, because I made sure that my face was very much on it. That's to do with my ethos as a person. I feel sometimes that in psychology professions, there is this tendency towards faceless namelessness, not having too much of a personality, not being too much in the room, which is to do with the work being client focused, and it can sometimes be to do with some Freudian stuff. Personally, I think it's important that my face is there. I think it's important to be present, to have a personality. To me, it's the most boring thing to be sat in a boring room with magnolia walls with someone who has no personality. I mean, how do you have the safety, in my view, to open up to someone like that? And so, yeah, I work with my ethos, and I have worked with my ethos in Therapyish, and that has developed over time. And so the majority of my clientele are people who are of Black and ethnic minority background. That's happened quite naturally, and tend to be like medium to long-term therapy, working with life transitions, trauma, depression, anxiety, range of different difficulties, that I've ended up working with couples work as well. Okay, and then I've been able to develop my business acumen as well, and so thinking about different things that I can do within Therapyish, business things, thinking about, okay, how do I get my income up? Or, okay, I had this influx of clients at this time, but now I don't, so how do I balance that out? How do I manage if there's a waiting list and stuff like that? How do I streamline processes? How do I communicate regularly with my clients? What do I do to get more clients when I need them? Therapyish has taught me a whole lot, and I'm really grateful and still learning. Okay, and then another major part of life after the doctorate was my thesis. So I didn't finish by the deadline, which was the September of 2021, because I was burnt out. It took me a while to realise, but with all the rigmarole that I had had, difficult placement experiences, being threatened to be failed, financial difficulties, personal things going on in the background, the stress impacting my health majorly. I did not have anything to even think about writing that thesis at that time. I couldn't have. And then because I went straight into work, I did not have the time. And so, managing work, private practice, and I was working part-time, doing private practice part-time. I didn't have the time or the emotional quotient to do it. Then came the confidence issues. My thesis alone, word count limit was 45,000 words. But then there was also the portfolio, the other aspects of the portfolio, which would add more words. And anytime I thought about that 45,000 words, I don't know, I just felt disheartened. I felt like I couldn't do it. I think the zeal that I had to even begin the doctorate and the push that I'd made and everything to embark on the course had been worn down with all the difficult experiences I had with different supervisors, and all the things that I had heard and experienced. My confidence had really, really been whittled down. And so I did not think or feel that I could complete it. And the longer time went and the more busy I got, and lots of things happened, even privately, I got married and just life was just going on. I didn't think that I could do it. And so I'm really glad that I did. Thank God. I learned so much about my capacity as a person. On the other side of completing it. So really, really grateful. And within completing my thesis, my aim was to establish my career path, establish myself as a researcher. So I think just being able to complete it and understanding that I can do it means that I know that I can embark on research again in future, publish more papers. This is a thing that I can do. I am a researcher, and that is part of my professional identity. So what would I do differently? Well, I guess what would I do differently? Well, I think part of what I would have done differently would have been to actually give myself the space and time to finish my thesis before applying for employment. And so I did want money. I did need money, and wanted to get into that. And that was part of why I applied for a job. I also was keen to start. However, I was living at home. There weren't too many financial requirements on me, and I think it would have really helped just in terms of completing quicker for me to have just waited, finished my thesis before applying for employment. It did mean that I had a lot of, I got a lot of experience very quickly, and even before I was fully qualified, which is amazing. And amazing that people would see that in you and entrust you with that. But it caused a few things. First of all, my first employment was in a prison setting, which is what I wanted and was quite keen on and passionate about. But that was so all-encompassing that I didn't even have the brain space. After work, I was knackered. I didn't have the brain space to even think about opening my laptop to study. So that was one. But secondly, not allowing myself to complete before finishing meant that I always felt half-baked or like I was an imposter. And this wasn't something that was necessarily said to me, more something that I felt internally, that I felt like I didn't fully have. I couldn't call myself a counselling psychologist. I didn't fully have what I needed to have to be there. And that imposter syndrome affected my confidence. And so I would do that differently. And I think another thing, which is a more generic thing, is overall, I would have taken my time. I think I was rushing towards doing the doctorate at the time that I did it. Because there's this kind of thing of if you get out of study, it'll be difficult for you to get back into study. And, just being really keen to get on the career path, which is understandable. And I'm very blessed that I had the capacity, emotionally, academically, to be able to do the doctorate, and that I was deemed so, which is why I was allowed on the course, amongst other things, the robustness, the experience. However, I was second to youngest in my doctorate. There were about 30 of us. I was second to youngest, and there was only one person who had gone straight from their undergrad onto the doctorate, and with the older members of the cohort, I could definitely see what it was like to come at this from a place of, I've researched this, I understand this, I've taken my time, and now I know what I'm doing. So even I remember conversations at the beginning of first year where people were talking about what they wanted to do for their research, and there was a difference. There was this call. There was this, I want to do mixed methods because this and this, and I want to do... Whereas I had more of this quickly get in, because if I don't, I won't be able to, and I'm so blessed to be here, and I need to make sure that I had this idea or thing of like this thing that I have could be snatched away from me. That meant that I was desperate to do it, but I hadn't given myself the space, the time, the mental capacity to just be, and to come at it when I was ready, and to come at it when I felt more prepared, had research. Don't get me wrong, I did prepare and I did research, but there's something that you can't quite quantify about someone, therapy, counselling, in general, any kind of related professions do tend to be a second profession. But even as a first profession, I think there's something about coming at it when you have fully prepared that I wouldn't say, even with all my research and experience, I wouldn't say I fully had, because I was so eager to do it and so worried that the opportunity would pass me by. So I would definitely take my time. I would definitely take my time if I was to do it again, and just allow myself to come at it more from a place of readiness and preparation than I did before. Okay, so as I wrap up, there's some key questions that you need to have in mind. So I know I have said a lot, there's been a lot of information, and I know that it can be a bit of a minefield. It is, however, important to ask yourself the following questions in order to help you determine what your career path is. Number one, what do you want to do? What is important to you? What do you want to do? Why do you want to do that? What profession, what area of psychology, what area of anything? What do you want to do and why? Do you have a firm understanding of what you want to do? Like I said, I wish I took more time, because even though I understood certain things, there was more to learn and more to understand. Do you have a firm understanding? Have you researched? Have you spoken to people? Have you gotten work experience in certain areas to really see what it's like? And what experience can you get that can facilitate you to have better understanding? What kind of roles do you want to go for? What level of roles do you want to go for? And what is needed to get where you want to go? Another thing that I haven't necessarily added here, which would be important to remember, is what is your ethos? At the end of the day, different therapy professions, different modalities of therapy are all about lots of different ways that people believe a question can be answered, in essence. So someone is depressed. Person-centered therapy would say that the client has the answers to their difficulties. Speak to them, extrapolate what they're saying, reflect on what they're saying, and you will guide the client towards their own answers. That's what person-centered therapy would say. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, would say, what thoughts are you having? What behaviors are you engaging with that are causing you to feel depressed, and work with it in a cyclical manner, and would look to identify and challenge the thoughts or change the behavior through behavioral activation to affect the feelings, to hopefully end in them not feeling depressed or not feeling as depressed, right? For the same depression, let's say a systemic therapist would say, okay, what's happening in your family, what's happening in your relationships, what's happening in your systems that is causing you to feel depressed? What's wrong with the systems? Where's the fault in the systems? And seeking to ask questions and learn in order to change the outcome. And so these are different ways to answer the same question. So really it's about what you believe as to what you decide to go for. And so some questions that I asked myself were, why counselling psychology and not counselling? Being sure to do my research between the two and understanding, what that was and what that meant for me. What my ethos is in terms of how I believe people should be helped. And I've kind of outlined that in my example that I just gave. And then what kinds of environments or services do I want to work in, and is that achievable with how I want to go about things? So for example, I knew that I wanted to work in prisons just from my general fascination and the documentaries I would watch and just my interest. I just knew that I wanted to work in prisons. But I knew that I didn't necessarily want to be limited to just working with forensic populations. And I guess at the time it was more clear cut. At the moment, I wouldn't say that forensic psychologists are necessarily just limited to that. But I wanted more of a breadth of understanding. So that's why I chose counselling psychology as opposed to forensic psychology, so that I would have the freedom and flexibility to work in a prison if I wanted to, but not be limited to just working with forensic populations, and certainly not be limited in my training in that direction. So I've given you so much to think about, and I hope that it has been helpful and insightful for you to kind of think about all these different things, these different elements of psychology, the psychology world, psychology training, what it is, what it entails, and to consider these key questions for you. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any kind of questions or anything, please do not hesitate to get in contact. Drop me an email at info@therapyish.co.uk. I'm more than happy to speak to you and do what I can to signpost you in the right direction. Thank you so much and take care.